Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Certified Forgotten. Donato loves my intros. I always get to look at his bright, shining face during this portion and know how much joy it brings him when I come in like I'm a late night radio host. You're listening to Certified Forgotten. We're still the best podcast out there that are talking about horror films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. I am one half your Matt host, as always. I am Matt Monagle. I am joined by Mr. Donato, full of the Christmas spirit and ready to talk about a movie that, frankly, if our guest hadn't picked for us today, you would have found a way to get this on the podcast anyways. I fucking guarantee it.
Okay, so everyone listening knows I have a list of movies that fit our criteria that I have made myself, and if a guest asks, I will hand it to them. And I have Tammy and the T-Rex, or sorry, I've had Tammy and the T-Rex on that list like number 2 or 3 for so long, hoping it would get picked. So yes, I'm very happy today.
Yeah, this is going to be a good day. This is like normally we'll talk a little bit, and I think you as the listener get to decide if this is a Donato episode or a Monagle episode. But come on, this is a Donato episode all the fucking way. I think it's going to be fun.
If you're listening to the podcast, or if you have been listening to podcasts for a while, I don't think there should be any question of where this will end on the Donato Monagle scale. If there is, I think you need to go back and listen to a few more.
Correct. But you know, you didn't pick this episode. You didn't pick this movie because we have an awesome guest this week who picked it for you. So, Donato, can you do introductions, please?
I can do introductions. Absolutely. This week on the podcast, not only did someone do everything that I wanted them to do and pick Tammy and the T-Rex, but we get to bring on someone that I have been reading and watching for quite a while. Their work has been all over. You've seen them in the entertainment journalism sphere for a long time, and I'm very happy to bring them here. And also, like, be on some sites with them now, which is very cool anyway. So I'm rambling. This is what it is. Mr. Eric Goldman, thank you for coming on, and it is a pleasure for all of us that you are here.
Thank you guys very much for having me. I'll just say up front, I'm battling a cold, so I'm sniffling, I'm coughing. But as you guys know, once you're podcasting for a while, you get pretty good with the muting when you're not talking to do that stuff. Yeah. But if I sneak in a cough or a sniffle, I apologize.
So, Eric, if it makes you feel better, I'm on something like week 5 of a cold. It's gone from like a cold to the flu to a sinus infection to whatever it is now.
Nice.
The good news is I feel pretty fine. The better news is that this is not normally as low as my register is. So I'm in that like good place where I get to enjoy the benefits of not feeling 100%. So hopefully you get to experience that for yourself too soon.
Excellent. Yeah.
You got a good MC voice going on right now that I'm really vibing on there, Monagle.
By my standards, I am rumbling a bit. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I'm definitely doing that little bit more. Like I know I'm nasally, which maybe is making me a little speak lower. Because usually I have like kind of a high voice that's also I have a notorious Valley Girl accent. And so this is maybe holding me back a little bit.
I like it. We're just going 40s style this week. Everybody's doing their best film noir voiceover. And hey, Eric, first of all, thanks for coming on the show. Donato, we were talking a bit before we were recording. You've been on Donato's list in particular for a long time, so we're excited to have you here. And, you know, I know that you have written about a little bit of everything, right? Like you are, there are journalists that we bring on that are specific to the horror sphere. And then there are film journalists that have a broad impact on the industry, but maybe deal a little bit in horror specifically. So for our purposes, we're going to treat you like one of our horror fans. And I want to know those formative experiences for you when you first found yourself, you know, at a young age, at an impressionable age, finding a horror movie, finding a horror book, finding something that really spoke to you.
So I grew up a big horror fan, and I'm a child of the 80s, and I also had a mom and dad, really mom, because my dad didn't really care about movies as much. My mom did, and she probably didn't like censor what she showed her kids. Maybe some people would say as much as she should, but I don't know. I was into it. And so I had very early memories of seeing like Poltergeist and it freaking me out, but loving that it freaked me out.
Yeah.
That's an early one for sure. I joke a lot about the fact that my mom showed me a movie, I don't know if you guys have ever seen, called The Entity, which is not a movie that a little kid should be watching, with Barbara Hershey when I was a little kid. But really, so I was already like enjoying, there was something about me that was definitely appreciating horror very young. And Poltergeist was definitely an early favorite, which is to say it scared me, but I liked that it scared me. But I think the turning point had to be A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, which again, it's my mom's fault because I saw that movie because she'd heard the first one was good and we watched the second one and then she didn't like it. And I was just like, Freddy Krueger is the greatest character ever. I need to see the first one. I'm now obsessed with Freddy. I'm all about Freddy. And so that was like my huge like lightning bolt moment, was how much I got into Freddy. We just are wrapping up on my podcast, the We Enjoy podcast. We're just wrapping up a run of finally doing the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. It's funny. It took a few years to get to it. The 40th anniversary kind of made me go, we got to do it. But yeah, just so into them. My bedroom at my dad's place was only Freddy posters, just like all the movie posters framed, all those ones you could buy in like, little like thrift stores in the rack. I had all those Freddy posters, Fangoria fold out posters. It just lined my bedroom. And then from there, that was it. Like I was, watching all the Friday 13th, watching the Halloweens, and it kind of grew, reading Fangoria, and it just grew from there. And I just became very, very into horror movies. Although Matt says, because we met in junior high, I was the Freddy guy. I was the Freddy kid when he met me.
I think it's funny to speak to your credibility as well as a horror fan, because sometimes, people do see, oh, you write about everything, so you don't have a niche or stuff like that, but you do. I know you as a horror fan because I met you in the New Beverly for the Scream marathon, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
takes a real hardcore horror fan to sit through any kind of marathon at the New Bev with those seats. So like, you really have to love what you're watching if you're gonna cram in on those steel fucking chairs that I know have been redone since, but still ain't, they ain't a loungy AMC at this point.
And come on, that was just Scream 1 through 4. I did Elm Street 1 through 7 all nighter, and I did the Friday 13th 1 through 8 all nighter. So that was an easy one. Just 4 Screams. Come on.
I know it killed me that I missed the Child's Play one. I was
Oh,
at a
that was fun.
festival, but I
Yeah.
was just like, I don't know if my back could have taken it anyway.
They're pretty intense, and especially those all nighters, the Elm Street and Friday 13th. They do everyone's gonna fall asleep, during the middle ground, and then B, they bring you like coffee and donuts at like 4 a.m. So there's something about like, this is insane what we're doing, but there's something very fun about it too.
I do want to ask a little bit of a tangent here, but because you are such a big fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, are you one of those folks that thinks we need to go back and take a critical reevaluation of Samuel Bayer's remake of Nightmare on Elm Street, or is that one that you think can live in the past a little bit?
Funny you should mention that. It's funny. I did not mean to be like Mr. Plug at the top here. It's literally the episode we put out this weekend. Is
Awesome.
Hitting Nightmare on Elm Street 2010, because we're almost done. We're going to do one final one on Freddy's Nightmares next week. No, and the funny thing is I hadn't rewatched. That's all the other ones I'd seen an embarrassing amount of times, like just so many times up through Freddy versus Jason. I can quote them all, even the ones that aren't good. Like Freddy's Dead, not a good movie, but I can quote it all. Elm Street 2010, I was actually pretty curious, right? I was like, because I'd only seen this one maybe 3 or 4 times and it's been over a decade, I thought, hey, I'm open to this. Maybe now I will be like, you know what? Let me see the good parts of it. Yeah, it's pretty weak. It does not work. And I'll repeat some of the things I said on that podcast. Just, I'm not anti-remake. I am not like, you can never do this. This is sacred ground. If it's terrible, it doesn't ruin the original. The original still exists. And most of the time people are going to forget the remake even exists. Like when you mention to people there's a Poltergeist remake and they go, huh? So I was open for it, and I just don't think it. I like the Friday 13th remake, but I think the Elm Street one just misses the mark. I also think its fundamental flaw is we're bringing Freddy back. We're going to relaunch the franchise, and also saying, and this time we're going full child molester, because nothing says franchise for the teens like saying we're totally going to make sure this is about a child molester. I think that was a probably miscalculation on their part.
That was very much my same reaction when I wrote about it for Blade Disgusting on my remake column. And I did the same thing you did. I saw it once when it came out and I was like, oh boy, that was not great. But hey, it's a decade later, it hit Netflix where I think it was like during lockdown too. So what else am I going to do? Let's give it another evaluation. And I think that is one of my harshest, let's call it assessments of an original to a remake on that Blade Disgusting column, because holy shit, it's bad. And like that child molester thing is just the start of it. Like we're really gonna go all in on that, and then it just goes downhill from there. Yeah, yeah, boy.
Yeah. No, I said to Matt Fowler, my co-host on my podcast, we were talking about why they didn't make a sequel when it did make money. It did make money, and I was like, yeah, sometimes obviously there are movies that are review proof, and you go, hey, it doesn't matter that it got bad reviews, it made money, we're gonna make a sequel. Right. I think they knew the reaction was really across, down the board. There was almost no one being like, no, we thought this was cool. We thought it was okay, even. It was pretty damn negative, and I think that they knew it was kind of, they unfortunately kind of built themselves into a corner, because, yeah, where do you continue with the even if he's the villain with the adventures of this child molester character, that they still put in the classic costume. It was just a weird mix.
Yeah, I haven't seen it probably since it came out, and I have a vague recollection of liking Jackie Earl Haley as Freddy Krueger. That was good casting, but
Yeah, it was great casting.
I wanted to put the remake thing in the back of your mind, because I think we're going to talk about movies and remakes weirdly when we talk about Tammy and the T-Rex. So we're setting the stage for a conversation we're going to have in the second half of the episode. But all right, Eric. So talking a little bit about your origins, copyright pending. I do want to talk a little bit about how you found yourself getting into the media side of things too, because I
Yeah.
think that for a lot of folks that we talk to, it doesn't occur to them. I mean, we've talked to people that didn't start writing about film into their 30s or even their 40s when they were like, "Oh, there's actually something here that I want to say." So I think it's interesting to me when people find themselves taking the leap from appreciating something to thinking, I have something I can contribute. I want to be involved in this a little bit. So can you talk a bit about how you found yourself getting into media, getting into writing and journalism?
Yeah, so I was a film major, but kind of by default because I was always obsessed with movies, including horror movies, but I was kind of an all-around just super film geek and obsessed with like sort of the industry and reading like I was, reading Daily Variety when that was still like an actual physical publication because I needed to know like the casting and what's in production. On Fridays was the day the Daily Variety would just do a list of everything that's in production. I was like so obsessed with knowing
Yeah.
all that stuff, what was going on before it was readily available on an ever growing internet. So I was a film major only because it was like I was like, well, I guess maybe I want to like be a producer, but that was never really true. I wanted to like kind of talk about the industry at a time when that seemed way more difficult, just because it was like unless you were Siskel and Ebert and a few other people, it's like, well, how do you actually make that your life, your job? Um, the very first thing I did professionally that was in any way doing this sort of job was nepotism, baby. No, was my dad had a friend who had a website that he was starting up that was offering discount movie tickets, and he didn't want it to just be come here to buy your discount movie tickets. He was like, well, we should have something else, and he thought maybe I'll do movie reviews. And he was talking to my dad about that, and my dad was like, oh, my son might want to do something like that. He's obsessed with movies. Like I said, my dad never had that same obsession. And so that's what I first started doing. And I started to make a little bit of contacts that way. I started like making some publicity contacts. I went to CinemaCon when it was still called Show West. For that, I was started doing like some features, some columns, but it was very small stuff and no one was reading it. But it was out there. And then, yeah, it kind of really, IGN, was where I really got started professionally. Here's the funny thing, I never read IGN. I was not a huge gamer. I owned systems and played video games, but super casual. But my friend who went there way more than me said, hey, there's a listing on IGN for a movie critic. You should apply for that. And I did, and I didn't get hired. And then a year later, there was a listing for another. I think he told me again, hey, there's a listing for a DVD critic when that was a thing that was a full-time job. Applied for that, didn't get hired. But they started using me as freelancer. And so so I was doing that other site for a tiny bit of money and no one was reading it. But really, I started doing some freelance for IGN. And that was the first time I really felt like that's the first time I went to junkets. So I started being sent on some junkets, did some roundtables, did my first ever one-on-one, which was with Justin Long, standing on a balcony at a hotel. I think I've told him that one other time. And then right place, right time, because I'd been freelancing for them for about 9 months when the editor-in-chief of IGN movie section reached out to me and said, hey, we're going to launch a TV section for IGN. And would you like to apply to be a full-time editor for that? And I did, and I got hired and ended up kind of, I think it's safe to say this. I started running the TV section not too much longer after that. I was always the one in LA anyway, and because IGN hadn't been covering TV yet full time, I really had to kind of cold call or cold email publicists to be like, we're covering TV now. Please invite us to do things.
Yeah.
And it kind of went from there. And so even though I was covering TV as my full-time job at IGN, it was always malleable enough. And I was like friends with, I knew all the people running the other sections. And it's like Jim Vejvoda was running IGN movies. And he knew, like, for instance, Eric loves horror movies. So it's like, I did the junket for Elm Street 2010 and I did the review for IGN. because there'd be stuff like that. So that's my long-winded how I professionally ended up doing this as a career.
And I'm curious because this is something that comes up, sometimes when younger freelancers ask for advice or people that are breaking into the industry. It feels like there needs to be. I feel like there are two kind of roads that you can follow, right? Like specialization or generalization. And so, as somebody who has done home video releases, who's done film reviews and coverage, who's done television reviews and coverage, do you kind of have a dog in the fight when it comes to whether you should be focus on being able to write about visual storytelling across any form, or do you say do a deep dive and know the history of a particular medium?
This feels like really self-congratulatory to say that, like, I think I'm pretty well-rounded, but I just am, because I was just always like obsessed on all facets like that. But I think you don't need to be. I mean, I think that there's definitely, it works and can be great to be more focused. And there are times when I felt like maybe I got passed up for some things because I wasn't as focused, and maybe they didn't understand how passionate I was about this thing too, like, yeah, that I am a big horror guy, but I was never like exclusively covering horror at IGN, especially because I was covering TV and there wasn't that much room to cover horror on the TV space, in the 2010 era. So yeah, I think that I hope it's not a cop out to say both are credible, but I do think, and it's worked for me, to kind of be more of a utility player on a bunch of different things. But I think that it's great to see the people that are focused too, and I think sometimes I really admire that when I see people that it's like, oh, they cover horror 100% of the time, and I love reading their stuff about it. And I think that definitely helps you on for certain people about credibility and understanding, like, oh, they are an authority on that subject. Because I think, yeah, not that this is not always me, but yeah, I'm sure sometimes it's hurt me a little bit to be a little more like, oh, we've covered a lot of superhero stuff. Do we want him to do the horror thing too? So yeah, that's my wishy-washy answer, I guess, on that.
No, I love it.
And I was gonna say too, just to add to that, like I think there's positives and negatives where the generality now of being a critic, like if you can't write about everything, that's not going to get you as far anymore. I mean, the idea now is that there is no more film critic position. Like Eric, you talking about IGN having positions specifically for like movie reviewer,
And none
like
of those
TV,
exist anymore.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like number one, you can't just be a critic anymore, let alone a specialized critic. So the idea that like when you go in for a staff position or something, like you need to know how to do video, you need to know how to do edit, like all these things, because you're gonna have to get called in to do that. And being, I've dedicated 10 years of being the horror specific guy, but no one else remembers that for the first 5 of that at least I was doing everything. So I've 100% come into situations where I'm like, I can write about the drama and the comedy and these things, right? Like, you don't have to go to other people. And the editor would be like, what do you mean? You write about horror all the time. That's what I think, that's what everyone knows you as. I'm like, yeah, but there's more to that. So there is the double-edged sword of being the horror guy or being the XYZ guy. But at the same time, you are going to get pigeonholed. I mean, that's something you just have to understand. And again, I think there was a time and place where I'm going to say like a site like Shock Till You Drop could exist.
Yeah.
That was fine. You could be the horror only guy because there's so many options now. I mean, look at how many staff positions are on horror only sites alone and how many are still thriving, let's say, let alone alive.
Yeah, definitely. As you were mentioning, like, yeah, things have shifted so much. And yeah, just to elaborate a little what I was saying with it, yeah, you were referring to, yeah, IGN, it's like all the titles have changed. And yeah, they don't break it up the way they used to. So it's not like I am the editor-in-chief of IGN movies, I am the one for TV. It's just because the industry's changed, because, and like you said, you kind of need to be a jack of all trades a lot of times.
Well, I'm curious now that we have a conversation a lot about, what the publications were that Donato and I grew up reading. And we've often said that we've patterned Certified Forgotten, the website, on The Dissolve, which is basically one long form essay per film, again and again and again, which is something we love. But as somebody who has been, and I don't think it's unfair to call you an elder statesman of the
Absolutely,
industry.
it is completely unfair. No, it's very fair.
You are an elder statesman of the industry. I'm curious where you go today, where you find yourself going to look for good film criticism, to look for good film journalism, because as as a freelancer, as somebody who owns your own podcast, who's working on it for your own thing, I always like to ask our guests, where do you go to find good film criticism too? Because I feel like that's something where, I know there's a few shared sites. I mean, we're all reading Vulture, especially if somebody like Bill goes writing about action movies, that stuff that bubbles up to the top of the list. But, in a fragmented internet social media phase, are there a few publications you find yourself gravitating towards?
God, I wish I had a better answer for this. Because yeah, as we've all kind of learned, it's like everything. There's a lot less site loyalty in the social media age. I think I saw that sort of shift in real time, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
I think because I remember a time, and this isn't. I'm kind of giving you a tangent here. Um, Not even talking about criticism. There was an era when I would every day go to EW.com because that was kind of a great site for like the breaking news. And again, that's been like a lifelong thing of like, what's happening? Who's being cast? And now you kind of know it'll just be put in your feed, whatever social media platform you're on, whatever, whoever's been cast in whatever movie is going to be put in your feed. So yeah, it really does become about sort of people that you like their writing, like like Amy Nicholson's reviews, and looking for that, and
Yeah.
different writers like that, where or in the horror space. I'm friendly with him, but it's like I always like reading what Brian Collins' stuff about horror is. So yeah, you start to learn those people, and who some of them are at the same site all the time, but some of them start to move around. And certainly in this era, as I can attribute to, like a lot of us are now moving around a lot more. So yeah, I think you do start to just like find those people that it's like, oh, I like reading your analysis of film, and sort of, and what are they saying. And I am a person also. It is funny that even though I think people read Rotten Tomatoes wrong, and it is funny to see how people don't understand how Rotten Tomatoes works, I will often, if there's a movie I'm really interested in, I will go through, and we were talking about Rotten Tomatoes on this podcast, I will go through and scan it and be like, where are the people that I want to see their thoughts on,
Yeah.
because I'll be honest, a lot of times I forget where they're writing for, or they're not at the same site all the time. They're freelancers like myself these days, so it's not like one place to find their reviews. That's been like a fascinating thing for me in the past decade, is sort of seeing that change a lot more, and just knowing that it's like for better or worse, and certainly sometimes very frustrating, being an entertainment journalist, it is less like I go to this site all the time, versus like, oh, I'm looking at these different writers and what they're talking about. And if there's a movie I'm really into, kind of looking for everything that people are writing about it, because I want to kind of dig deep into what is the thought process on this, and why is this getting the reaction it's getting.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting point to bring up the social media aspect of it all,
Mhm.
because when I was getting into the industry maybe 12 years ago, I guess I was on the back end of what you're talking about,
Yeah.
where sites were losing that quote unquote credibility, and it was going back to the writers, which like is again a double-edged sword, to bring that phrase back into it, because I think it's wonderful, the idea that so many of y'all who like helped build the foundation of entertainment journalism online, and we're like a big part of that, can keep going back on that. Like, you have your following, like you have your people that will always read you, and a lot of those people are in positions of hiring too, and positions of editorial. So like the good thing is those writers that build that following and stuff, like they can keep going around places, and they can keep like being in that circle. I think the other, like the double-edged part of that, is trying to break in has been like a harder thing for a lot of younger critics and stuff like that. And again, this is not a complaint. I'm not
No,
coming
no.
at you with this, but
Yeah.
it was really interesting to see. I read slash film, I read Bloody Disgusting growing, like all those sites growing up, and all of a sudden it switch from the site to the writer, and like now I'm just following the writers, and now I'm doing that. And all of a sudden some writers just kind of like vanished after a little while, because they didn't have that yet. Like I could read them at a place, but then resting on the social media and stuff, like that went away. So it's been really interesting the way people do that. And always like share your writers, like it is such an important thing. And I know people say it online all the time, but I think if someone sees a writer tweeting out or posting, hey, you should share our stuff if you love us, that can seem self-serving. I understand that, but I think people really need to understand that if you want a certain writer to succeed, you really have to be the reason they succeed.
No, I completely agree. And yeah, because there are less full-time staff positions for people who are reviewing stuff these days, which means a lot of us are floating around. And one week you might see my review at one place, and then another somewhere else, or stuff I'm posting myself. I always am thankful to publications that are sort of making sure they're getting like prominently displayed who's writing it, but also even if they're like retweeting me, tweeting about the review and stuff like that. So it's a little thing, but it can be very appreciated because there's just less of those full-time positions these days than there certainly were. Like you were saying, if you were getting into it 12 years ago, yeah, you've seen that change happen too.
So, last question is we're talking about the way that the industry has changed, things that are changing within film. Today's movie, I think, is an interesting open door to talk about 90s nostalgia too. Because we have lived, and we've talked about this on the show, we've lived in an era for about a decade now where John Carpenter was the guy in the horror sphere, right? And you couldn't, you threw a stone at Hollywood and you would hit like a composer with a synthesizer, like no matter where it landed. And that was we were desperately and tirelessly trying to relive our favorite moments of the 1980s. Part of that is because nostalgia works in 30-year cycles. And now we're sort of entering an era where we're looking back to the 90s, and suddenly with movies like Y2K and others, we're starting to get to a place where like 90s nostalgia is catching up a little bit. So we'll talk about the impact of the 90s on a particular film in a few minutes. But as somebody, I'm looking at the shelf you have in the background. I see a lot of TNG. I definitely recognize some 90s love happening right there. I'm curious how you feel about where the industry is now that we're pulling forward a little bit and looking at, in particular, like 90s blockbusters for inspiration and for relevance in the movies that we're celebrating and evaluating today.
Just as an aside, full credit to my wife. The TNG figures are hers. Everything else is mine. But
All
she
right,
is
fair enough.
no, I love TNG too, but she's like hardcore into it. I'm sorry. Repeat your question. I just wanted to because I was in my mind. I'm thinking I need to make sure he knows his
No,
Twitch
I love that you were immediately holding space for your wife. That's awesome. Talking a little bit about we're becoming a culture the nostalgia has moved forward. We're thinking about the 90s
Yeah.
right now. Tammy and the T-Rex is a great example of a movie that is now in vogue as a cult classic because it's a 90s film, in no small part because of the stuff that it does that solidifies it as like a 90s movie. So I'm kind of curious how you feel about the industry right now, especially when it comes to genre stuff, is we're going back to the 90s for inspiration and not just the 80s anymore.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because as you know, the Scream franchise obviously has returned. Some speed bumps along the way with the next installment, but we're also right now they're filming a new "I Know What You Did Last Summer" movie. So as you said, it's all cyclical, and it makes sense that we're gonna. I mean, the '80s, has been impressively and some might say frustratingly durable as a go-to for nostalgia. And I still think it actually sticks around, but I do think '90s that there's a lot of that too. Um, I also, I think that, of course, you just have the simple fact that people in the industry who grew up in the 90s are making decisions more and they're going to do that. But also, I think, it's just like anything. It's like, oh, the people who grew up in the 90s have, spending money to spend on stuff and all the things they grew up with, are going to have that power, the power of nostalgia. I'm sure you guys have talked about how sometimes we put rose-colored glasses on for things that we grew up with, and so even if it
Maybe a
might not
little
be,
bit.
maybe a
Yeah,
little bit,
maybe a little bit.
so yeah, it just makes sense to me, and I think that you know, the closer, even though at this point, like we've been in this, not just this decade, we've been in this century, this freaking millennium for 24 years now, which is an entire like new generation, or you could even say a couple generations. But I think there's such a clear line with like pre 2000 and post. I mean, it's such a huge year. I think that does put the 90s in sort of a special place as far as like, oh yeah, it's it's pre millennium, pre 9/11. Just so many things that make it like a line in the sand. And so yeah, I think that there is a bit of like Return to Innocence sounds overblown because there's plenty of shitty things about the 90s, but there is that like, I remember loving these things, whether it be the cartoons or the horror movies or just, yeah, different things of that era. And so I think the fact that, yeah, I knew I Know She Did Last Summer movie, which I enjoy, I Know She Did Last Summer, but I don't think it was great. And
Mm-hmm.
the sequel's bad. I never saw the third one, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I'll go see the new one. Of course I will. And they know that, and it makes sense, and you just hope it's like a fun spin on it, and that they can do something fun with that title, because maybe it's not happening for the purest artistic reasons, but that doesn't mean clever, creative people can't work on it, and sometimes you get really pleasantly. I don't want to even say surprised. You just get something that's like really fun, with the delivery of it. Like I'm a giant Scream fan, giant. Uh, and so I was gonna have trepidation about someone not Wes Craven doing new Scream movies. And then besides the fact that I have a Ready or Not poster that you can't see over there, I loved what Radio Silence did when they took over those Scream movies, and so
Yeah.
it's like there's always room for a new spin. It doesn't mean it's gonna ever replace the thing. It can't replace the nostalgia of the original, but it certainly there is room to have fun with it. And kind of like I was saying with any remake, revival, reboot, whatever you want to call it, if it's terrible, contrary to what the internet will tell you, it doesn't ruin the original. In fact, people just usually forget about it.
Right.
I'm just here for the renaissance of Limp Bizkit.
Oh my God! Right. By the way, I even wrote about it. I wrote about it on my Substack. I'm in defense of Y2K, which is pretty hated on, but I thought it was good. I thought it was funny.
I gave it an 8 out of 10 for IGN.
Nice.
Out of Southby. It is the Donato approved Y2K.
No, that's awesome. The Y2K cult starts now. Excellent.
I am very happy for both of you. I absolutely hated it. So that is
Matt, you're the first person I've talked to that I know personally that liked that movie besides me.
Donato is always, you can always count on him to zig where others zag. And if you want to understand why Matt Donato might like a movie like Y2K, you might start by taking a moment here and going and watching Tammy and the T-Rex, which is the topic of today's episode. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, a big brown dinosaur is going to kill a bunch of people. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Sometimes when we're about to talk about a movie, I write a synopsis, but it just so happens that my co-host, Matt Donato, wrote a synopsis for this movie all the way back in 2019 when it was playing on the festival circuit. So, courtesy of his 2019 slash film review of Tammy and the T-Rex, The Gore Cut, here's the opening paragraph to Matt Donato's review. Tammy and the T-Rex is a tale as old as prehistoric time. Boy meets girl. Girl falls in love with boy. Girl's punk ex-boyfriend kidnaps her new crush and leaves him to be mauled by lions in a wildlife park. Wounded boy is stolen by a crazed genius, has his brain removed, then implanted in an animatronic Tyrannosaurus Rex. Boy, now a Jurassic Park prop, goes on a deadly rampage in order to win back his lover and reclaim a new body. Shakespeare meets Mary Shelley meets 90s slapstick comedy. Quote, end quote, thank you, Matt Donato. Eric, we're going to start with you. You were invited on the podcast. This is the movie you brought for us. I'm curious why this was the one that jumped out at you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a very entertaining film. This was one of the movies I kind of knew about. I'd heard the title, but didn't know much about the details of it. And then I know it got the Vinegar Syndrome, kind of like restored the original cut of it, put it out, on a Blu-ray a few years ago. And this was an early pandemic watch for me. My first time watching this was one of those like, all right, let's watch Tammy and the T-Rex. And yeah, I was just thoroughly entertained by the insanity of it. What you're describing, because look, as I'm sure we'll talk about the backstory of this movie, the behind the scenes being like, we have a mechanical dinosaur for a couple weeks, let's make a movie, and we have to do it right away. There's so many different ways you could do that are simpler stories than what they came up with. So that entertains me, just knowing that they came up with the convoluted plot description that you just said to get there. And then the fact that, yeah, it's a totally weird movie. It's clearly understands that it's ridiculous and they are playing it heightened and, it's like, they're playing it goofy. And sometimes it's legitimately funny and sometimes it's groaner funny. But yeah, I just was very entertained by it. And obviously they have this nice thing of they cast two people before they were stars, right? Speaking of the 90s, two people that would become very big by the late 90s. Denise Richards kind of really having her heyday in the late 90s. Paul Walker kind of becoming hey, it's that dude until Fast and Furious at the start of the new millennium would really become a star. But, you have to give the credit to the casting people for casting them. Because I was like, after this, neither of them do much for like 3 years. And like he does like a Touched by an Angel episode until he starts doing like Meet the Beatles and Pleasantville before he starts playing assholes or not assholes because he played a good guy in Varsity Blues. So yeah, kudos to the people who cast the two of them. Yeah, there's just a lot of things I enjoy about this very, very ridiculous movie that I also hope, living in LA, we have the benefit of all these revival theaters and getting to see movies under really fun circumstances, I have to go see Tammy and the T Rex at a theatrical screening at some point. I've missed a couple, but in the future, I think it would be quite entertaining to see this with a crowd.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I saw it first.
Ah,
I was a non-watcher as well until that 2019 Fantastic Fest, and I must give all the credit to Mr. Brad Henderson, friend of the podcast, because that was actually his first Vinegar Syndrome acquisition. So he's the one that put all that together and found the gore cut and was able to get that release out. So without Brad Henderson, we might not be talking about the R-rated gore cut of Tammy and the T-Rex, not Tanny and the T-Rex.
and the
Which
teenage T Rex.
Yeah, sorry, Tanny and the teenage T-Rex
Right.
that was retitled and all these things. Like the background that you described is so crazy, and it's like even not all of it. Like the idea that Stuart Raffle was writing the movie as it was happening, so you can understand why it feels kind of chopped up at times, and the fact that they had 2 weeks. They had 2 weeks with that dinosaur, and they were able to pull this out of their butt somehow. I don't fucking. It is Demon Wind all over again, except Demon Wind is somehow more straightforward.
Yeah, you mentioned this a little bit in the lead up, Eric. So I want to read that. This is from the Bristol Bad Film Club, an interview that Stuart Raffle did a couple of years ago. And he talks about the timeline of this. A guy came to me who owned theaters in South America, and he said, I have a T Rex. It was animatronic and was going to a park in Texas. The eyes worked, the arms moved, the head moved. He had it for 2 weeks before it was going to be shipped to Texas. And he came to me and said, we can make a movie with it. I said, what's the story? And he said, I don't have a story, but we have to start filming within the month. So I wrote the story in a week. And the interview, by the way, if you haven't checked it out, with Stuart Raffle at Bristol Bad Film Club is a lot of fun because it's not just about Tammy and the T-Rex. It's going back and talking about all of the films he's done, Mannequin 2, the kind of his body of work of like gonzo 80s and 90s horror.
Mac and Me, man. Paul Rudd's
I
favorite.
I wasn't going to mention it, but Mac and Me, you got to mention Mac and Me. But I feel like that is, I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks that we've lost something a little bit in the industry by not having these weird, like forced origin stories for movies like this anymore. Because I love like so many of the kind of gonzo horror movies we like in particular. I feel if you go back and look at it, a lot of times, especially if you go back to like the 70s and 80s, it was like, yeah, we had an ice cream truck for like 5 days. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh shit, let's make a horror movie about an ice cream. And it becomes this thing, right? And so I whether or not you think the T-Rex and Tammy and the T-Rex works, I love the fact that it was just like, we have one thing and a group of people were like, fuck it, we're good. That's all we need to make this movie.
Yeah, even though this movie is a few years into the 90s, it feels like it's from the 80s VHS era. It feels like it's a Charles Band or a Trauma situation of like, we have this thing, let's film everything around it. And there is something very amusing about that scrappy way of doing things that not only were we getting out of it by the 90s, certainly as the 90s progressed, but we certainly don't have almost anything like that now. It's just not the way the film, without like a glut of super cheap VHS movies.
Yeah.
We just don't have that same thing. We have cheap movies, but not this kind of cheap movie. And there is something, I guess it's double nostalgic, right? Because this is a movie from the 90s with two people that become stars in the 90s, but it also kind of also seems like this strange echo of some 80s chutzpah behind it, you know?
Yeah, like this should be one of those movies that came out in the 80s fueled by nothing but like cocaine and some rich dude's extra money pile that was lying around. That was
Right,
like,
right.
why not? I mean, that is the vibe of this whole movie though, because what is it? Is it a romance? Is it a comedy? Is it a horror film? It never knows what it is, and that is why it's such an anomaly of a film. And you're not allowed to do that anymore. Everything is so much more rigid. Everything is so much more studio focused and has to follow a template. Like even indie horror, like we're talking about indie horror films through the 80s, 70s, and into the 90s because we're getting shit like this. But at the same time, those eras had so much more freedom to kind of do what they wanted, where indie horror today still follows the template. It's like what is famous now? What is working? Is it trauma horror? Is it Saw's torture porn? Is it the remake craze that's coming back again in indie horror, which is so crazy because like Screambox is doing Street Trash and Silent Night,
Right,
Deadly Night.
right.
But there has to be an impetus to be like, what are we doing here in a studio sense? Where earlier there was a sense of what are we doing here, but no one had any fucking clue, and that was so much more fun.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I enjoyed about this movie, I will say, is that for a film that is billed as what it is, that there's an animatronic human brain T-Rex that goes through and kills a bunch of people. I watched it for the first time recently, so my watch of this was new to me, and I watched the gore cut. I don't feel an over sense of nostalgia to go watch the pre-edited one. Although, in all of my reading, especially with a lot of the coverage of Bloody Disgusting, it seems like there's genuine nostalgia for the non-gore cut. Which, hey, to each your own. But what I loved about this in the beginning is that you think you're going to watch kind of like a wall to wall Gonzo movie, and there is no T Rex until about 32 minutes into a 90-minute movie, which is such a delay, I would think, especially for the type of it. Like if it's Tammy and the T Rex and they don't put his brain into the T Rex until like minute 32, I'm like, whoa, you're not leading maybe with your best foot forward here if this is what we're building towards. So I want to talk about that first 30 minutes a little bit where you're getting to know teenage Paul Walker, you're getting to know Denise Richards. Like, talk a little bit about your reaction to that, especially now today, Eric.
Well, I mean, so I should say I've only seen the movie a couple times. Like, I watched it in the early pandemic, and then I watched a bits and pieces of it, and then obviously rewatching it for this. Look, this movie has me when the two guys grab each other by the dick in the middle of the fight, which is a few minutes in.
It's a
Like,
testicular standoff. They even
yeah,
have a
yeah.
saying for it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's very well known. The local police have seen it before because it's like, what the hell is going on with this fight scene? There's a lot of things that yeah, it's just, because it's goofy, it's silly. All the interaction is very, heightened and cheesy in a kind of endearing way. And then they get in this fight, and the escalation of it so quickly, and yeah, each of them grabbing each other by the junk, and the screaming and yelling, and Denise Richards is absolutely screaming her head off watching this happen. Yeah, that is when I'm like, what the fuck's going on, in a great way, because it's like, okay, this movie. Although I should say, even in the preamble to that, uh, Paul Walker charmingly eating a flower and her going, "You're crazy." I'm like, yeah, he's crazy. He's a flower eater. Yeah, it's just it's operating at that sort of very cheesy but amusing level. And then that fight. The other thing about that fight I want to mention is that I love when you're watching older movies and it's clear this low budget movie, and though there are stunt doubles listed in the end credits, they clearly just let Paul Walker and that other dude really like do a shitload of that fight themselves in a way that's probably pretty dangerous, and no movie with a real budget would allow their above the line stars to be doing, because you're
You
watching them
boarded
and like, oh, they're like flipping each other, like doing shit.
You
And I
need
can
like a
only imagine.
fight choreographer and then maybe like an intimacy coordinator for that particular fight scene. I don't know. It's interesting.
But I don't know if you ever listened to the Zach to the Future podcast that Mark Paul Gosselaar was doing for a while, and he would constantly mention on it that he was shocked to see watching it him as a teenager, and you don't think of Saved by the Bell as a stunt show, but he's like, oh man, we really just like leapt off that desk. There's no fucking way we would be allowed to do that today, especially given we were like 17. And they're just like, yeah, do it. And that was an NBC show, albeit a low budget one, much less a movie like this. We're like, yeah, just have our lead actor flip around a guy and grab the other guy by the junk. Sure.
I mean, it is a sensational sense of unreality in that first scene, or first few scenes, let's even give it,
Yes.
where that fight alone is enough to pull you into this world and say, this isn't what is going on here. Like, this is also a world where the bullies are taking their beaten up target to like a wildlife conservation and
Oh
just
my
breaking
God.
in, and then there's lions and leopards and jaguars. And that's all like you said, that's all before even like the T-Rex comes into play. And then you have the horniness of all of the evil doctor and his assistant, let's say Helga. Just the amount of blatant innuendos that aren't even winking at you, they are literally slobbering all over the screen. It is not caring in such a fun way. And I say that because a lot of other movies I've seen that try to be subtle about this shit and try to like have some kind of sense of keeping it together, they lose me. Where I think Tammy and the T-Rex, where some people might find it very stupid, I understand it is very stupid, but it's committing to it in such an emphatic way, and that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it entertaining. Like, you have to hit Tammy and the T-Rex on such a level that is like, how do you actually believe this is going to work behind the camera? And I don't know if they do, but they make it look like they do on the screen.
Absolutely. And it's just because the movie is existing in its own insane reality. And even I'm like the type of person, I'm watching a movie like this, I'm like, I want to know the backstory here on how Tammy, who just seems like a sweet high school girl, dated this psychopath, who I
Yeah.
presume is a few years older because they said he was in jail, not juvie, uh, and is so insane that he just bursts into her home past her parents with his gang. And then, like you said, we'll drag him to a wild animal park. I'm like, okay, this guy is like a straight up psychopath. What was the courtship of this like? Like, what was this Tammy's bad boy phase in a really extreme way? Did her parents meet this guy? Because this doesn't, I can't quite understand that coupling, but I love that. And then, like you mentioned, just once you meet Terry Kaiser and his group, which it seems like they did a thing where they're like, we're gonna give him a super buff jacked guy, and then a super tall woman, and then a super short guy. They're all kind of cast to be visually like super distinct. And
Hmm.
I'm amused by that, you know. Maybe I'm an easy mark, but I thought that was amusing.
Yeah, there's another great quote in the Bristol Bad Film Club interview where he says, "I'm also the biggest plagiarist. I'm constantly asking the cast and crew if they have anything better that they can add. When you make films like that, they're group endeavors. In this case, we have a dinosaur head for 2 weeks. So what are we going to do? You just smoke a lot of pot and try and figure it out." And I think that there's a purity. Like I truly I spent some time today going and looking at old interviews, and I don't understand the idea of a PG-13 cut of this. I truly don't. I don't know how you could look at this and see it as anything other than a series of, wild, like, again, we've mentioned Trauma a couple times. Like, it's that kind of energy, right? Like, it is somebody who's basically just, for lack of anything better to do, having a couple of gore set pieces and sort of building the rest of the stuff around it. So it boggles my mind that there was any producers that was like, no, 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 we can make something coherent, pejorative, coherent out of this and turn it into a little bit more of an accessible movie, because each scene is like, the wackiest decision with the characters and the dialogue and the staging that they could. It's a ridiculous movie. And I understand the desire to make this something that you can have in the front row blockbuster, but it's wild to me that anybody ever tried. I kind of want to watch the PG-13 cut just to see what they removed.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is because it is hard for me to understand how they ever thought there's a kid-friendly version of this movie, how they edited around it. Like, think about the sequence where they actually like do the brain transplant, and they do the full joke of like Bobby, the assistant, played by John Franklin, Isaac from Children of the Corn, getting splattered with blood, just blood, 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 that he never washes off. By the way, I like that a lot of time passes. The buff dude changes, but not Bobby. He's like, I'm just gonna walk around with this blood. Like, yeah, how does that work? Because you can't show the brain cutting and all that, but is he just gonna walk around with blood and we don't see why?
Yeah.
This is a movie, yeah, where like sweet Tammy and her lovable, sassy gay friend desecrate corpses, for a long scene in the movie. So, or just holding up dead people and tossing them to the side. So it is bizarre to think like it would be like taking one of those trauma movies. I mean, like the kid, I know they made Toxic Crusaders, but that was a completely new production versus like trying to take a trauma movie and cutting around all the stuff that makes it a trauma movie. It seems like a very, very strange thing that they did. By the
Yeah.
way, I hope it's not giving away too much to say when we're recording this, because I don't know when it's going up. But we were recording this the weekend of this movie's 30th anniversary opening, which I think is amazing. I
Did
just
that on
saw that.
purpose.
I
I'm gonna
just
I'm gonna
saw
cut Donato.
that.
Donato's gonna be like, oh, I didn't even know. No, we absolutely did that on purpose, Donato. We had that plan the whole time.
I found that out 2 minutes ago, but I was like, oh, December 21st. Oh, that's really funny.
Exactly as we planned it, as Mongal
Yes.
said. That is totally what we did. But yeah, I mean, even going back to what you're cutting out to make it PG-13, I mean, the overt sexuality of so many of the, again, quote unquote, innuendos that aren't innuendos, they're clear as day. Like, how do you get away with the scene where they're making jokes about how Tammy just had sex with a giant T-Rex? Or how do you get
Uh-huh.
away with all of the chew on my rope or whatever it is, the little lines that Dr. Walkenstein keeps making? They like, I'm sure those got passed because, of course, everyone's okay with sexuality, but violence, blah blah blah, like stuff like that. All the ratings arguments that people have. But yeah, I like. Why would you want to see the toned down cut? Because to me, the gore is what makes this movie. And I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
the best part of it, but without going to that extreme, when we have the comedic extreme, we have the romantic extreme. There are so many of those already, but adding that gore gives it its one extra piece that you're like, why does this movie exist? How did they make this? What is going on? Oh, they're building around these gore set pieces. And you know what? Like John Carl Buechler did the effects, and he's a great effects artist. And he's also directed films like Jason versus Carrie, obviously the Friday the 13th
Starring
film,
Mr. Terry Kaiser.
right?
So
Exactly,
yeah.
everything full circle.
As
But
Dr. Bad News Cruz.
but like keeping on that though, I mean, you had someone really reputable doing the effects as well. So it's not like you just phone things in. Everything here was so deliberate. And obviously deliberate's doing a lot of heavy lifting, knowing that the script was being written as it was going. But when you have Sean Whaling getting gored and all the intestines ripping out, or the multiple beheadings, like they didn't even go with easy stuff. It's not just people getting chewed up by the dinosaur. It is legitimate beheadings over and over again, or the buff guy getting flattened like a toothpaste roll, or like just going down the list. The gore is really good in this, and that's its selling point. Like you can talk about all the things we've talked about. You can talk about it being the crazy romantic comedy about two things that shouldn't work. But when you add, oh, but you're watching it for the gore, that's the hook. That's it. So when you cut the hook out, yeah, what is left there?
Yeah, I mean, I think because the sort of joy of this movie is that it's like, these almost like golly gee teenagers. Then not only does this insane thing happen to them, but yes, then it becomes insanely gory. And like you said, so many head chomps, and even the guys who get like trapped under the car, it's like they burst blood.
Yeah.
They could have done that non-gory, but it's like no, everyone's gonna gush in this, and I think that is a huge part of the movie.
It's like Tom Savini in like Maniac, like that kind of level gore to me. Of like
Mhm.
you said, the explosions, like in Maniac, the guy's head explodes into a burst with the shotgun blast. It's not just a shotgun blast. Same thing here. It's not just a little chewed up mangle. No, people get fucking gored.
Yeah, I mean when they decapitate Michael, right, or when they perform the autopsy, remove his brain. I don't even know what to call it at that point. But that's a kind of a tough scene to watch. Like that's a legitimate stomach turning sequence, both when it's him and then later on when they kind of swap in a pretty realistic for whatever time period you go, a pretty realistic dummy. Like
I
you're
thought
like,
the same
ooh,
thing. Yeah, that was really well done.
that's uncomfortable. I do think I listen. Donato knows that this is not the type of horror movie that I turn to in my hour of need. But I will say this: there was a moment here that I kind of like made my peace with the movie, that I found the equilibrium, and that was when they go to the graveyard for Michael's ceremony, and they wait it out until everybody goes home, and they open the coffin, and his body has just completely fallen apart. It's such a good visual gag. It creates like such a nice series of subsequent problems for the characters, because you think that this is going to be one of those, you do think it's that there's a chance that this is somehow drawing on like Buena Vista vibes, where they're going to put at the end of the movie, the brain's going to go back in the body and
Yeah,
everything's going to be okay. And they very explicitly at that moment be like, oh no, this is not happening again. So now we got to go grave rob and find other stuff. Once you, so that to me is the moment that you embrace the fact that you're not watching a inexplicably R-rated family friendly comedy. You are watching a trauma film. This is a trauma movie in spirit, if not in label. And at that point, I think the movie sort of settles into a really nice groove. um, I want to talk a little bit. I mean, we talk about the gore, but I want to talk about the comedy too, because I think that there is, I know that there is a lot of like gentle poking fun at homophobia. I know that there is a lot of like, rich kid, poor kid comedy that they're playing with, like jocks versus nerds and all that kind of stuff. It's doing so many things that are stereotypical of the teen comedy of the time. But again, all that stuff is dialed up to 11 too. So like, basic question, but if you haven't seen it before, Eric, do you think somebody would, would you find this funny if you're watching it today?
I think on multiple levels. My answer is yes. Although that operates on multiple levels, right? Because there are people that would be like, "This is so fucking dumb," and they're laughing at it. But like I said, the actual intentional comedy is a mixture for me, right? Like, do I think it's that funny when he does the Wizard of Oz bit? You were there, you were there. No, it's been done 10 million times.
Yeah.
But there are other parts that I did think, were legitimately making me laugh. And I think some of it, like I was saying, like Denise Richards like screaming, like, "Leave me alone." I'm like, I think that was intentionally funny. I don't know, whether she knew it or not, but like the director was probably like, "No, go bigger, go bigger,"
Yeah. Yeah.
and some of these bits, like, the little T-Rex hands that are reaching up that are clearly not attached to the body. And yeah, just a lot. And obviously, like Terry Kaiser screaming "Live, live" when he's Mock trying to save him. Yeah, that's funny, you know. I think I would be surprised. Obviously, there are always going to be people who are like, "This is so fucking stupid. Why are you making me watch this?" But I
Yeah.
think if you are open to like this kind of goofy movie, you'd find something to laugh at, whether you think you're laughing at it or with it. Honestly, I think it's a mixture for me. But I think it makes me sad that some people would watch this and be like, "This is stupid. I don't want to watch this."
Yeah, I mean, everyone in here are caricatures. They're not characters. They are absolutely played to the nines. And I mean, I think that works in a lot of instances because the movie meets their level. They are not in a universe that is unlike them. I think sometimes you're watching a movie and you have one or two characters and then you have one or two caricatures. And when they don't mesh and the film itself is taking itself too seriously, that's a problem. Tammy the T-Rex is never taking itself any bit seriously, let alone too seriously. So you can have like Theo Forsett plays Byron, and he is the gay son of the sheriff, and there is a lot of jokes being thrown around there where the hicks in town are making and homophobia jokes,
Yeah,
and it is intentional commentary, and I think some people might read that the other way of it just about being a byproduct of 94. But when you actually look at the way Byron is allowed to be a character in certain moments, I don't think it is just caught in that kind of mindset. I think it is trying to make a commentary on that. And
Yeah.
I say that because you look at Billy in one scene and like Billy is the bully. Billy is Michael's villain, let's say. And the scene where Billy dies right before it and he's having sex in the car and she sees the T-Rex and starts screaming at it and he doesn't and he just starts screaming, "Am I good? Am I good? Am I good?" And
yeah,
like
yeah,
that level alone of mocking Billy
Yeah.
relentlessly, I think that is what the tell to me is that this movie is trying to roast its targets and themes. Let's say it is a roast comedy at that point, so I think that worked for me. I think that sex scene alone makes me laugh so much. And anything with the tiny hands, yeah, you're gonna put little tiny dinosaur hands on somebody and have them stroked in East Richards face as the T-Rex is crying because its tear ducts work somehow. Yeah, no, you got me, you hooked me in.
and think about a moment like maybe laugh a lot when they find Carl's body the next day, the buff guy, and he's like Judge Doom flattened, right?
Yes.
And Helga starts to roll up his body. Ultimately, she just drags the corpse behind her, the flattened corpse. But the fact that her first thought is, "Oh man, they killed our bodyguard dude. Roll him up because he's flat." I think that's really freaking funny. And I will say, it's funny because I remember watching the dead meat kill count for this movie, and I had the same reaction that like James did on that, which is when they bring in Byron, I was like, "Uh oh, here comes the super stereotypical character." And they're just gonna like clown on him. Now, yes, he is super heightened and stereotypical, but ultimately he's pretty like, I say positive in that he and Tammy together desecrate corpses, but he's just
Yeah.
allowed to be like one of the heroes. One fainting spell aside, they don't like, and he's very much accepted, not just by Tammy, but Michael. So it's all relative, right? Because obviously he is not the center of this movie. He is not a fully actualized character, but for the era, that could have gone way more south. And I'm very happy that the only time that they use the really bad F word is, like you said, in the context of characters that are clearly supposed to be imbeciles and shitty people are using it, and it doesn't feel like we're supposed to be on their side. Because so many movies with characters I love, like Bill and Ted, I'm like, no, don't say that, please. So it's strange for me to see like, I respect Tammy and the T-Rex, man. They were coming from a good place on this.
Yeah, Tammy and the T-Rex somehow got it right when other movies didn't. Like,
Right.
what world do we live in where that's actually
Right? Is Tammy the T-Rex woke, guys?
Yeah, that's the SEO headline for this one.
The birth of woke.
I will say that this is a film where the big penultimate moment is the FBI and the local sheriffs come together and shoot the T-Rex to death, and then they all stand around as Denise Richards sobs over the body, and they all cry. The FBI is crying,
We
Sheriff
just
Black's
shot him.
crying. They just shot him to death. Helga is there and she's crying too. So
Yes, Helga
if
somehow survives. I don't understand how
yeah,
that
she's doing
works.
great. So if that doesn't tell you what kind of movie this is, I don't know what will.
it's a real tearjerker.
Do you guys think, I was trying to figure out if everyone he kills is supposed to be part of that guy's gang? I couldn't quite tell when he was like the guys under the car, because I don't remember, like there's a lot of guys.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, were they part of the gang? I can't tell if he's killing random people or it's just because it seemed like they kind of went out of their way, like the old woman, like, she gets away and people that he's not like killing everyone.
I think of the scene when he trips the party goers running
Yeah.
down the stairs, because to me, those are the people that I was confused on. I had that same thought because it is very clear he is killing everyone who has wronged him. But at this party, are they all just Billy's people? Because I don't know. There were some nice people there. Byron was there. Obviously, Denise Richards' character was there. Like, it wasn't all them. But yeah, you have him stomping over them and flattening them to get to Byron. And I was like, all right, I don't know the politics on this one, but I'm gonna go with it.
I think, well, at the end of the film, Michael's brain in a jar has government support to find him a new corpse to be reincarnated in. So we're going to assume that legally, at the very least, he's been exonerated, even if morally we can hold judgment over him and his robot body.
This movie ends with a brain having an orgasm.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Before we finish this podcast, I just want to say that no, we can't get away from that. That's life.
No, yeah, I was like, this movie ends with, I guess, a high school girl doing a striptease for a brain attached to a camera, and the brain has an orgasm. Oh, and she serves it alcohol. Don't forget that.
Right, the underage drinking. I want to say pitch room when that happened, but I know it wasn't a pitch room. That was written probably on the day, and they're like, "Fuck it, let's go."
Listen, sometimes you just got to end your movie. I don't know what else to say.
It's like the adventure continues ending because we don't get to what's gonna, like, we are like, oh, some corpses are coming in. They seem promising, but we don't actually see if they're gonna get the right corpse for him.
Well, I'm almost convinced that this is probably going to be next in rotation for somebody like a Mike Flanagan to give it a very serious and thoughtful touch. So who knows?
Oh man, we're gonna cry so much at the end of the movie.
Yeah, there's going to be so many monologues in this one.
I was going to say the dinosaur is going to have a great monologue.
Yeah, just 2 minutes of roaring.
Is it shitty for me to say? I don't like to I don't want to trash Denise Richards, but she's not always the most emotional actress, and she can be fairly vapid. So it feels like a funny thing for me to say, like, I thought this was one of her better performances. Like, because of the fact that she has to do this insanity of like, I love you, yelling repeatedly to a robot dinosaur, but she's doing it very earnestly. And there's something that like, I'm like, oh wow, this is like, she's acting a little more, dare I say, naturalistic than she would by like the time she's doing like a Bond movie or even Starship Troopers, where I think she's very purposely cast by Verhoeven. Yeah, because it is funny. Denise Richards and Paul Walker, how Ken and Barbie they are, right? They're like two very beautiful people, but in an almost like you're too perfect. But I was like, yeah, Denise Richards, I really like her. It's like the most like girl next door I've legitimately bought her playing. And I thought that was funny to say in Tammy and the T-Rex small movies.
Because I think there was a little bit of, she was asked for that same performance over and over again, but in movies that did not require it. Let's say, like she got stuck playing a certain kind of role, and like that sucks. I think the stereotype casting, all that stuff, like that is a problem in Hollywood. And you do one role, and I'm not saying that Tammy the T-Rex started that for her, but she did start to play roles where it was the same thing over and over again, and she was overselling in certain roles that I just think the movie didn't meet that, and I just think it's a bummer that she got stuck doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, when the Tammy the T-Rex legacy sequel goes around.
She's going to play the mom. Yeah, she'll play new Tammy's mom. That's exactly.
Yes.
I did see, as I was watching football today, they were promoting the new lineup of Fox shows, and she's going to be in a show called Special Forces, which is basically training for, training actors like Stephen Baldwin and Denise Richards, and I guess Cam Newton is in it too, to run them through the paces as if they were training for Special Forces.
Oh, this is reality. At first I thought this is
reality television.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
No, so she's out there. She's still doing the damn thing. So we'll see. I will leave the conversation about Denise Richards in director Stuart Raffles' hands, because in that same interview, he says, all the actors on the film, though, were great. Denise played that scene where she's talking to the dinosaur for real and as best as she could. She never was a great actress, but she was pretty. So that is what Stuart Raffles has to say.
He was being so sweet that he's like
hard turn.
I think that what I choose to believe from that is that he appreciates the performance that she gave, and I do think that there's truth to what you said, Eric, where this is, It takes a movie like Tammy and the T-Rex and a director like Paul Verhoeven to understand how her persona can be used really, really well on screen. So I think that is the legacy. These two movies understand not just Denise Richards, the actor, but also Denise Richards, the celebrity, the model, the whatever you have. And I think
Yeah.
that's a fun bit of insight into her character. And I will exonerate Stuart Raffle for his mean line if he understands the fact that she was playing it straight, which is absolutely the right thing to do for this movie.
Yeah.
All right, that leads us to our last question, which is how does this film find its audience? I think partially answered now because it does have that Vinegar Syndrome recut. It has been re-released as the comprehensive version of itself, which is we usually don't have a movie go back to a more definitive version of it, the director's original vision. I mean, the two that come to mind are Kingdom of Heaven by Ridley Scott and Tammy and the T-Rex, the gore cut. Very comparable films in a lot of ways. But we are entering sort of a period where these more blockbuster style horror movies, things that were swinging, we're trying to look like blockbuster movies of the age. We're trying to look more expensive, or at least have details that were more expensive. I think we're going to find a lot more of these 90 films that were doing the thing, the viruses of the world, where they really tried to look big and bad. And so, Eric, how do you think that Tammy and the T-Rex, the gore cut or the original version, is going to resonate with future audiences and moviegoers?
Yeah, by the way, I was just thinking about the fact this movie opened a year after Jurassic Park. I love that it's like, okay, dinosaur fever, man. Let's see.
2 weeks.
Yeah, I think first of all, huge thanks to Vinegar Syndrome for bringing this back and giving us the score cut, because if we didn't have that, I don't even though I'd heard of the movie, but I can't imagine I would have only checked out the PG-13 version that got released. It is funny that now I want to see it because I've seen this version just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that this was a ready-made cult movie, and I think that they were very savvy to do this, to restore this. And we're lucky that they had the footage. I was thinking about this a lot watching Terry Kaiser. Again, I joked about him being he's most famous for Weekend at Bernie's, but for me, I've seen Friday 13th Part 7 a million times. So is Dr. Cruz. Friday 13th Part 7 is one of the most infamously edited down movies in that series as the MPAA got stricter and stricter. So all the kills they cut away, including his, and he's like the biggest asshole. He's the one you're waiting for. Let's see Jason kill this guy, and then they cut away. In this movie, in Tammy and the T-Rex, he kind of gets the death. We see it. It's the same thing because Jason cuts his guts. We just don't see it in that movie. We get to see the entrails. We get to see it all fall out. So I'm like, oh man, Tammy and the T-Rex they were able to restore where Friday 13th Part 7 was not. So yeah, I think this movie, thanks to this restoration, its cult will only grow, and like I said, I'm very envious of you getting to see it, Matt, in theater, but I know that they keep doing it. I've seen the Alamo Drafthouse has played it. It's it does make the rounds now because of this cut existing. I guess New Beverly won't show it unless they make a print of the unrated cut. But no matter where I see it, I want to see it at one of those screenings because it's just like a Troll 2. There are certain movies that it's like, oh, that rediscovery. And this one wouldn't have gotten that if they didn't recut it. But now that they have, I think it's just like, yeah, this is we don't have, it's not like when I grew up and there's you loan someone a VHS tape, but there is you should check this out. And preferably if you can watch it with a group of people, whether that be just, group of people in your living room or go to a revival house. And I think that people will, I would hope that this is a dorm room favorite. And if it's not yet, it hopefully will become one as time goes on.
I was going to say, if you live in a city with an Alamo Drafthouse, check your Weird Wednesday listing for the next couple of months, because this definitely is in rotation in New York. It's definitely in rotation in Austin. It will play at least some point in the next 12 months, probably.
Again, as we said, 30th anniversary happens to coincide with the holidays, so I can see why maybe everyone's not doing the. Yeah. But hey, Halo effect. January, February. Let's do this 30th anniversary screening.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add because that is correct. Vinegar Syndrome did the thing that I always say already. They put it out, and not only that, it got festival runs too, like Fantastic Fest giving it a big rollout like that. I will 100% admit, seeing it in the theater packed, just laughing and just all that insanity happening on the big screen is just so much different than even watching it here with my roommate, because watching a comedy with two people alone is a little harder than an entire theater of people laughing along with these ridiculous lines. So I will stress, if you are going to see this for the first time, if you can hit it in a theater, my God, do that. If you can't, make sure you got a good group at least, because this is one of those movies that really deserves it. It's same thing like with like Hundreds of Beavers, where I watched that on a screener and I was like, oh, that's really funny, but I found it funny. I don't know if anyone else will. And lo and behold, now it is the sensation it is. I think Tammy and the T-Rex is the same kind of film where I watched it myself and enjoyed it. I don't know if it's funny. Have the people around you so you know
Yeah.
how funny it is. But the work is done already. Thank you again, Mr. Henderson. And we just have to keep talking about this one because that's what it deserves.
And if you want to pick up the disc, there's something like 5 hours of interviews.
It deserves it.
20-minute interviews with every person involved in the production of it. Pour one out for our distributors and our video archivists, because the sheer volume of original content that they're putting out with DVD and home video releases is just, sometimes it boggles my mind. And I'm like, you trace this person down who's been out of the industry for 25 to 30 years and had them talk about a movie they made, when they were 22 years old. I love it. I can't get enough of it.
Yep.
All right, that is our show. Tammy and the T-Rex it's streaming in a couple of places right now. I believe the easiest place to find it would be on Pluto. That's where I watched it. Really good quality upload there. So go support our friends at Pluto. Go see it there, or go buy the DVD if you can. Eric, thank you for being our guest. We want to give you an opportunity here to plug anything and everything you've got upcoming. So website, social media, let's have it all.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Second, I'll just mention I watched this movie on Peacock, and I just recently switched to with ads Peacock, and I was happy to see this was a thing where they showed me like 3 minutes of ads at the top and then no breaks as the movie progressed.
Oh yeah,
So,
Pluto was commercial breaks. So if you are a person that doesn't like, it kind of felt natural. It actually weirdly felt like I was watching a late night movie, so I kind of didn't mind the commercial breaks. But if you don't want that, watch that. Go do Peacock instead.
Yep. But yeah, it's a bunch of places. But yeah, so thanks again for having me. And then finding me online, social media, I'm the Eric Goldman. That's Eric with a C, Goldman, at most of your platforms. Most of your dark times of Twitter or Blue Sky or Instagram. I've been trying to do more on YouTube. I'm also the Eric Goldman on YouTube. I guess it's that weird at the Eric Goldman thing after the slash. But anyway, that's where you can find me. 90% of the places is at the Eric Goldman.
Donato, where do we find you on the socials?
Same place as always. You can find me at Donatobomb, DONATOBOMB, primarily on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Letterboxd. I'm going to play around with the tiki-taki still, just testing things out. But again, I'm going to say it every time. I'm going to wait and see if it gets banned next year, and if it doesn't, I'll actually start using it.
I feel like I feel like I need to remind you of this always. Do you want to plug your participation in the Merry Hour? Because that's a really fun show that you do, and that puts you on YouTube very solidly.
Yes, that is correct. I do a live stream with Perry Nemiroff every Friday or Saturday or Sunday. Sometime during the weekend, we take a chance to talk about movies, talk about some fun stuff, and take your viewer questions, as always. It's been a lot of Oscar talk recently, so yeah, you pop in for an hour, we drink, we talk about things. It's a nice little wind down of entertainment journalism that gets kind of goofy and doesn't have to be as rigid as usual.
That's what I like about it. Might you be dedicating some time on an upcoming episode to an upcoming horror release by a filmmaker that you and I sometimes argue about?
We'll see.
Okay. All right.
What I mentioned earlier, but I'll say again, my podcast with Matt Fowler is the We Enjoy podcast, where we talk about a lot of random things, but we try to keep a theme going, whether it's the director, a actor, or a film series. Like I said, we're just wrapping up the Elm Street run, and then we got some different things we'll be doing in.
Fantastic. There just need to be more Matt's on podcasts. So I'm really glad that you dropped your co-host there.
Oops, all Matt's edition.
Correct. As for myself, you can find me on the normal places, mostly Blue Sky, a little bit of Instagram, TikTok. I lurk. It's Monagle, and then the rest of it. I have a good SEO last name. But do please, if you liked what you heard today, follow us. Go to certifiedforgotten.com and check out some of the excellent horror criticism that we have to offer. Go to Spotify or Apple Podcast or YouTube Music or wherever you listen to your podcasts and subscribe to the show, because we are lining up to bring even better, bigger, better, more guests in 2025 than we did in 2024. We've got some pretty ambitious plans for the podcast, and we'd love to have you with us. So that's it. Eric, thank you so much for finally coming on the show. We probably will have you back sometime in the not too distant future. So I hope you have another curio in line with this one to bring us.
I'm sure I can find something, but yeah, thanks again for having me on, guys. It was really fun and very fun to talk about this cinematic masterpiece.
And on that note, Donato is going to take us home.
Testicular standoff.